The morning sun cast long shadows across the military base as General Marcus Thompson stepped out of his black sedan. His polished boots clicked against the concrete with the precision of a man who had spent 30 years climbing the ranks of the army. Everything about him spoke of discipline and order. From his perfectly pressed uniform to the stern expression that rarely left his weathered face, Thompson was known throughout the military as a man who valued tradition above all else. He believed that women belonged in support roles, not on the front lines where real soldiers fought and died. This wasn't hatred or malice. In his mind, it was simply the natural order of things. Men were built for combat, women for caring. It was a belief that had served him well throughout his career, and he saw no reason to question it now. As he walked toward the main building, Thompson's aide, Lieutenant Colonel James Reed, hurried to catch up with him. Reed carried a thick folder filled with personnel files. The reason for today's inspection of the 47th Infantry Division. "General, I have the files you requested," Reed said, slightly out of breath. "The division has shown remarkable improvement in their combat readiness scores over the past 6 months." Thompson nodded curtly. "Good, that's what I expect to hear. Colonel Sarah Mitchell has been in command here for 8 months now. I want to see if she's maintaining proper standards." The mention of Colonel Mitchell's name brought a slight frown to Thompson's face. He had opposed her appointment to lead the 47th Infantry Division, arguing that such a position required someone with more traditional leadership qualities. However, his objections had been overruled by higher command, much to his displeasure. Sarah Mitchell was everything Thompson believed a military leader shouldn't be. She was young at 35, she was a woman, and worst of all, in his opinion, she had earned her rank through field service rather than following the traditional path through military academies and desk assignments. Her file showed numerous commendations for bravery, but Thompson dismissed these as political correctness run amok. As they entered the main building, Thompson was surprised by the efficiency he observed. Soldiers moved with purpose, equipment was properly maintained, and there was an unmistakable sense of pride in the air. He had expected to find a division struggling under what he considered inadequate leadership, but the evidence before his eyes suggested otherwise. "Where is Colonel Mitchell?" Thompson asked Reed as they walked through the corridors. "She's currently in the field with Alpha Company, conducting a training exercise. She should return within the hour." Thompson checked his watch impatiently. He had little time for delays, and the fact that Mitchell wasn't present to greet him personally only reinforced his negative opinion of her leadership style. A proper commander would have ensured they were present when a superior officer arrived for inspection. While they waited, Thompson decided to tour the facilities unannounced. He visited the barracks, the mess hall, the armory, and the medical facility. At each location, he was grudgingly impressed by the high standards he observed. The soldiers were well trained, equipment was in excellent condition, and morale appeared surprisingly high. In the mess hall, Thompson overheard a conversation between 2 young soldiers that caught his attention. "I'm telling you, Martinez, Colonel Mitchell saved my life during that mission in Afghanistan," said a corporal with a slight limp. "When that IED went off and I was trapped under debris, she didn't hesitate. Came right into the danger zone to pull me out, even with enemy fire coming from 3 directions. She's tough as nails," Martinez replied, nodding. "Remember when she took on those 3 guys who were harassing Jenkins? Didn't even raise her voice, just made it clear that kind of behavior wouldn't be tolerated. They transferred out the next week." Thompson frowned as he listened. These stories painted a picture of Mitchell that conflicted with his preconceived notions, but he reminded himself that soldiers often exaggerated tales of their commanding officers. He would reserve judgment until he met her personally. An hour later, the sound of vehicles approaching announced the return of Alpha Company from their training exercise. Thompson positioned himself at a window overlooking the motor pool, curious to observe Mitchell's interaction with her troops without being noticed. What he saw surprised him. Colonel Sarah Mitchell emerged from the lead vehicle, her uniform dusty and her face streaked with camouflage paint. She moved among her soldiers with easy confidence, checking on equipment, asking about minor injuries sustained during the exercise, and offering praise for good performance. There was no pretense or formality, just a leader who clearly cared about the people under her command. Mitchell was shorter than Thompson had expected, perhaps 5 feet 6 inches, with auburn hair pulled back in a regulation bun. Her build was athletic but not imposing. and she appeared younger than her 35 years. What struck Thompson most, however, was the obvious respect her soldiers showed her. They didn't display the forced deference often seen with unpopular commanders, but rather the genuine regard that comes from trust earned in difficult circumstances. As Mitchell approached the building, Thompson noticed something else that gave him pause. She walked with a slight favoring of her left leg, subtle enough that most people wouldn't notice but obvious to someone with Thompson's experience reading human movement. It suggested an old injury, probably sustained in combat. "General Thompson." Reed appeared at his elbow. "Colonel Mitchell has returned. She's requesting 10 minutes to clean up before meeting with you." Thompson nodded, though internally he disapproved of the delay. In his day, soldiers met with superior officers regardless of their appearance. However, he decided to allow the courtesy, if only to see how Mitchell would present herself. 20 minutes later, 10 minutes longer than requested, Thompson noted with irritation, Colonel Sarah Mitchell knocked on the door of the temporary office that had been set up for the general's use. At Thompson's gruff enter, she stepped into the room and snapped to attention with military precision. Colonel Sarah Mitchell reporting as ordered. "Sir?" she said in a clear, confident voice. Thompson looked up from the files he had been reviewing, prepared to deliver the stern lecture he had planned about punctuality and proper military bearing. However, the words died in his throat as he took in Mitchell's appearance. Her uniform was now clean and pressed, her hair properly arranged and her posture exemplary. But it was her eyes that caught his attention, clear, intelligent, and completely unafraid. Here was someone who had looked danger in the face and hadn't blinked. "Colonel Mitchell," Thompson said finally, his voice carrying its usual authority. "We need to talk." Colonel Sarah Mitchell stood at attention, her eyes fixed on a point just above General Thompson's shoulder. The silence in the room stretched uncomfortably as Thompson studied her personnel file, occasionally glancing up to observe her reaction. He was testing her composure, a technique he had perfected over decades of military service. "Your record is quite interesting, Colonel," Thompson said finally, his tone neutral but with an edge that suggested criticism was coming. "Multiple deployments, several commendations for valor, and rapid promotion through the ranks." "Some might say too rapid." Sarah remained motionless, her expression unchanged. "Yes, sir. I've been fortunate to serve in situations where I could make meaningful contributions to the mission and the welfare of my soldiers." Thompson raised an eyebrow at her measured response. He had expected defensiveness or perhaps an attempt to justify her career trajectory. Instead, Mitchell displayed the kind of calm confidence that came from genuine competence rather than bravado. "Tell me about Afghanistan," Thompson said, closing the file and leaning back in his chair. "Your third deployment. The incident at Forward Operating Base Kappa." For the first time, Sarah's composure flickered slightly. Her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, and Thompson caught a brief shadow that crossed her features before she regained control. "What specifically would you like to know, sir?" "Everything. From the beginning." Sarah took a barely audible breath before speaking. FOB Kappa was established to monitor a suspected weapons smuggling route through the mountains. Intelligence suggested the area was relatively quiet, but that assessment proved incorrect. "We were undermanned and under-equipped for what we encountered." Thompson had read the official reports, but he wanted to hear Mitchell's version. The mission had been classified at the highest levels, and much of what had occurred remained redacted in the files available to him. "Continue." "On the morning of March 15th, our perimeter came under coordinated attack from approximately 40 insurgents. They had been planning the assault for weeks, using the terrain to mask their approach. Within the first 10 minutes of the firefight, we lost our commanding officer and 2 squad leaders." Sarah's voice remained steady, but Thompson noticed her hands, clasped behind her back, had tightened slightly. Whatever had happened at FOB Kappa, it still affected her deeply. "I was the senior remaining officer, so command fell to me. We were outnumbered 3-1, low on ammunition, and cut off from reinforcement. The insurgents had sophisticated equipment and clearly knew our defensive positions." Thompson leaned forward, interested despite his reservations about Mitchell. "What did you do?" "I had to make a choice, sir. We could attempt to hold our positions and likely be overrun within hours, or we could take the fight to them. I chose offense over defense." This surprised Thompson. Military doctrine in such situations typically called for defensive positions and waiting for backup. Taking 20 soldiers against 40 entrenched enemies was either brilliant or reckless, and the distinction often depended on the outcome. I divided our remaining effective personnel into 3 groups. The first would create a diversion on our eastern flank, drawing enemy attention and hopefully convincing them we were attempting to retreat. The second group would circle north and attempt to destroy their heavy weapons position. The third group, which I led personally, would assault their command position from the south. Thompson found himself genuinely intrigued. And this worked? Sarah's expression remained neutral. The diversion was successful initially. Sergeant Peterson led that group and managed to convince the enemy that our main force was fleeing. However, the northern assault ran into unexpected resistance. Staff Sergeant Williams was killed and 3 others were wounded before they could reach their objective. What about your assault? For a moment, Sarah hesitated. Thompson sensed there was something significant she was reluctant to discuss. But military protocol demanded a complete briefing. My group managed to reach the enemy command position, but we encountered a problem. They had positioned snipers in elevated positions that covered all approaches. Any direct assault would have been suicide. So what did you do? Sarah met Thompson's eyes directly for the first time during the briefing. I created a new diversion, sir. I exposed myself to enemy fire to draw their attention away from my soldiers' approach. Thompson felt a chill run down his spine. You used yourself as bait? Yes, sir. I moved into an open position where the snipers could see me clearly. While they focused on trying to eliminate what they perceived as a target of opportunity, my soldiers were able to flank their positions and neutralize the threat. The matter-of-fact way Mitchell described putting herself in mortal danger unsettled Thompson. This wasn't bravado or recklessness. It was a calculated tactical decision made under extreme pressure. The kind of decision that required both courage and clear thinking. The casualties? Thompson asked quietly. We lost 4 soldiers during the entire engagement. Without the diversionary tactics, intelligence estimates suggested we would have lost 15 to 20 personnel, possibly everyone. Thompson sat back, processing what he had heard. The official reports had mentioned the successful defense of FOB Kappa and commended the tactical innovation displayed by the commanding officer, but they hadn't captured the personal cost of Mitchell's decisions. Colonel, I've read the reports about your injuries from that engagement. The file mentions combat wounds but provides no details. Sarah's composure finally cracked slightly. She looked away from Thompson, her gaze focusing on some point beyond the window. Yes, sir. I was wounded during the diversionary action. How badly? The question hung in the air between them. Thompson realized he was pushing into territory that might be deeply personal, but something about Mitchell's story compelled him to understand the full picture. Sir, if I may ask, why is this relevant to your inspection of the 47th Infantry Division? Thompson considered her question. Why was he so interested in these details? Officially, his purpose here was to evaluate the division's readiness and efficiency, but something about Sarah Mitchell had captured his attention in a way that surprised him. Because, Colonel, leadership in combat reveals character in ways that peacetime service cannot. I'm trying to understand what kind of officer you are. Sarah nodded slowly. The enemy snipers were very skilled, sir. When I exposed myself to draw their fire, they didn't miss entirely. I was hit twice, once in the left thigh, once in the shoulder. But the wounds served their purpose. My soldiers were able to complete their mission. Thompson found himself looking at Mitchell with new eyes. The slight limp he had noticed earlier, the way she occasionally favored her left side. Suddenly these took on new meaning. These weren't just old injuries. They were deliberate sacrifices made to save the lives of her soldiers. The engagement lasted 6 more hours after that, Sarah continued. We held our positions until reinforcements arrived. All surviving personnel were successfully evacuated. And you remained in command throughout? Yes, sir. Until I collapsed from blood loss after the medical evacuation was complete. Thompson felt something shift inside him as he listened to Mitchell's account. This wasn't the story of a woman who had been promoted beyond her capabilities due to political correctness. This was the record of a soldier who had demonstrated genuine leadership under the most extreme circumstances possible. The afternoon sun slanted through the office windows as General Thompson struggled with emotions he hadn't expected to feel. Sarah Mitchell's account of the FOB Kappa engagement had shaken his fundamental beliefs about women in combat, and he found himself questioning assumptions he had held for decades. Colonel Mitchell, Thompson said finally, I'd like to observe your troops in action. I understand you have a combat simulation scheduled for this afternoon. Yes, sir. Bravo Company is running urban warfare scenarios in the training facility. They'll be testing new tactics we've developed for close quarters combat. Thompson nodded, though internally he remained skeptical. Training exercises were one thing, but real combat was entirely different. He had agreed to observe partly out of genuine curiosity, and partly because he hoped to find evidence that Mitchell's success at Phi Kappa had been luck rather than skill. I'll accompany you to the training facility, Thompson said. And Colonel, I want to see your soldiers' natural performance. No special preparations because a general is watching. Sarah's slight smile suggested she had anticipated this request. Of course, sir. What you'll see is exactly how we always train. 20 minutes later, Thompson found himself in an observation booth overlooking a sophisticated urban warfare training facility. Below, 30 soldiers from Bravo Company moved through a mock city environment, complete with buildings, vehicles, and civilian mannequins. The exercise was designed to test their ability to clear hostile buildings, while minimizing collateral damage. The scenario involves rescuing hostages from a building controlled by enemy forces, Sarah explained as they watched the soldiers take their positions. Intelligence suggests 12 to 15 hostile combatants, unknown number of civilian captives, and possible booby traps throughout the structure, Thompson observed as the soldiers moved with practiced precision. Their communication was clear and efficient, their movements coordinated and confident. More importantly, they showed the kind of aggressive competence that Thompson associated with elite units. Who's leading the assault team? Thompson asked, pointing to a sergeant who seemed to be directing the main effort. Sergeant First Class Maria Rodriguez. She's been with the unit for 4 years and has 2 combat deployments under her belt. Thompson frowned. Another woman in a key leadership role. His instinctive reaction was disapproval, but he forced himself to watch Rodriguez's performance objectively. She moved through the simulated urban environment with the fluid grace of an experienced soldier, making split-second decisions that kept her team safe while advancing the mission. Rodriguez was one of the soldiers at Phi Kappa, Sarah said quietly. She was part of the Northern assault team that lost Sergeant Williams. Thompson watched Rodriguez with renewed interest. As her team reached the target building, she deployed her soldiers with tactical expertise that impressed even his experienced eye. 2 soldiers covered possible escape routes. 2 more provided overwatch from elevated positions, and the remaining team prepared for dynamic entry. Breach in 3, 2, 1. Rodriguez's voice crackled over the communication system. The assault unfolded with textbook precision. Rodriguez's team flowed through the building like water, clearing rooms systematically while maintaining constant communication. When they encountered simulated hostiles, their response was swift and accurate. When they found civilian mannequins, they immediately shifted to protective mode. Thompson had observed hundreds of training exercises throughout his career, and this was among the best he had ever seen. The soldiers displayed the kind of tactical sophistication and unit cohesion that took years to develop. Impressive, Thompson admitted grudgingly. How long did it take to bring the unit to this level? These particular soldiers have been training together for 18 months. But the foundation was built over several years of consistent development. As the exercise progressed, Thompson found his attention drawn to the way Mitchell observed her troops. She wasn't simply watching for mistakes or evaluating performance. Instead, she seemed genuinely invested in each soldier's success, noting their individual strengths and areas for improvement with the eye of someone who truly cared about their development. Hostages secured, building cleared, Rodriguez reported as the exercise concluded. 0 civilian casualties, all hostile targets neutralized. Thompson nodded approvingly, though he remained reluctant to admit how impressed he was. As the soldiers gathered for debriefing, he decided to observe Mitchell's leadership style in this more casual setting. Sarah moved among her soldiers with easy familiarity, offering specific praise and constructive criticism in equal measure. She didn't maintain the formal distance that Thompson preferred in his own interactions with subordinates. Instead, she treated her soldiers like valued team members whose opinions and welfare mattered to her personally. Rodriguez, excellent work on the room clearance sequence, Sarah said to the sergeant. However, I noticed you hesitated slightly before entering the 3rd room. What was your thinking there? Rodriguez considered the question seriously. I thought I heard movement that didn't match our entry pattern, ma'am. Turned out to be nothing, but I wanted to be certain before exposing the team to potential crossfire. Good instinct. In that situation, caution was the right choice. Better to take an extra second than to walk into an ambush. Thompson observed this interaction with growing fascination. Mitchell wasn't just giving feedback. She was teaching. More importantly, she was creating an environment where her soldiers felt comfortable discussing their decision-making process honestly. "General Thompson," Sarah said, approaching him after the debriefing. "I'd like to show you something else if you have time." Thompson checked his watch. His original plan had been to complete the inspection and return to headquarters by evening. But his curiosity about Mitchell and her methods had grown stronger throughout the day. "What did you have in mind, Colonel?" "I'd like you to meet some of my soldiers informally. Not in a formal setting, but just talking with them about their experiences and perspectives." This was highly unusual. Most commanding officers preferred to control their superior officers' interactions with enlisted personnel, managing the information flow to present the most favorable impression possible. Mitchell's willingness to allow unsupervised contact suggested either supreme confidence or dangerous naivety. "Very well. Lead the way." Sarah guided Thompson to the base's recreation facility, where off-duty soldiers gathered to relax and socialize. The atmosphere was casual and comfortable, with soldiers playing pool, watching television, and engaged in conversations that stopped abruptly when they noticed the general's presence. "At ease, everyone," Thompson said, though the formal command did little to reduce the tension his appearance had created. Sarah addressed the room with a smile. "General Thompson is here to learn more about our unit. He'd like to hear about your experiences directly from you. Please carry on with your activities." Gradually, the soldiers returned to their conversations, though Thompson noticed they remained aware of his presence. He approached a table where 4 soldiers were playing cards, including Corporal Martinez, whom he had heard speaking about Mitchell earlier. "Mind if I observe?" Thompson asked, pulling up a chair. "Of course not." "Sir?" Martinez replied, though his nervous glance toward his cards suggested he was struggling to concentrate on the game. Thompson watched the card game for several minutes before speaking. "Corporal, I understand you've served under Colonel Mitchell for some time. What's your assessment of her leadership style?" Martinez exchanged glances with his fellow soldiers before responding carefully. "She's fair, sir. Tough when she needs to be, but she genuinely cares about us as people, not just as soldiers. Can you give me an example?" Martinez hesitated, clearly uncertain about how much he should share. "Well, sir, when my wife was having complications during pregnancy, Colonel Mitchell personally arranged for me to get emergency leave. She even helped coordinate transportation so I could get home quickly. My daughter might not be here today if she hadn't acted so quickly." Thompson found himself surprised again. This level of personal involvement in soldiers' lives went well beyond standard military leadership practice. "And professionally? How does she handle military operations?" This time, another soldier at the table spoke up. "Sir, I've served under 6 different commanding officers in my 12 years of service. Colonel Mitchell is the only one who has never asked us to do something she wouldn't do herself. When there's danger, she's right there with us. When there's hard work, she's the first to grab a shovel." Thompson spent the next hour moving through the recreation facility, speaking with different soldiers about their experiences. The picture that emerged was consistently positive, but more importantly, it was believable. These weren't rehearsed responses or politically correct platitudes. These were genuine testimonials from soldiers who clearly respected and trusted their commanding officer. As evening approached, General Thompson found himself walking alongside Colonel Mitchell through the base's quiet residential area. The formal inspection had ended hours ago, but Thompson had requested this informal tour, ostensibly to see the living conditions, but actually because he wanted more time to understand the woman who was challenging everything he thought he knew about military leadership. "Colonel, I have to ask you something that's been bothering me all day," Thompson said as they paused near a small garden maintained by the base personnel. "Why didn't you request a transfer after your injuries at FOB Kappa? Many officers would have taken a staff position after that kind of trauma." Sarah was quiet for a moment, her gaze fixed on the carefully tended flowers that somehow managed to thrive in the harsh military environment. "Because my soldiers needed me to stay, sir. And honestly, I needed them too." Thompson waited for her to elaborate, sensing there was more to the story. "After the engagement, I spent 2 months in military hospitals. During that time, I received letters from every surviving member of my unit. They weren't just get-well wishes, they were asking me to come back. They told me about the replacement officers they'd been assigned and how different things were without what they called real leadership. And that convinced you to return to active field duty? Sarah turned to face Thompson, her expression more open than it had been all day. General, with respect, I think you might misunderstand what drives some of us to serve. It's not about following orders or advancing careers. It's about the people we're responsible for. Those soldiers at Fob Kappa didn't just serve under my command. They trusted me with their lives, and I trusted them with mine. That kind of bond doesn't just disappear because you get wounded. Thompson found himself studying Mitchell's face in the fading daylight. There was a sincerity there that he rarely encountered among officers of her rank. Most colonels he knew were focused on their next promotion or their post-military careers. Mitchell seemed genuinely focused on the welfare of her soldiers. "Tell me about your current soldiers," Thompson said. "What drives your approach to leadership here?" "Every person in this unit has a story, sir. Sergeant Rodriguez, who you saw today, joined the Army to escape poverty in East LA. She sends half her pay home to support her younger siblings. Private Johnson is here because his father died in Iraq, and he wanted to honor his memory through service. Corporal Martinez is saving money for his daughter's college education." Sarah paused, looking back toward the buildings where her soldiers were settling in for the evening. These aren't just names on a roster or numbers in a readiness report. They're human beings who have entrusted their safety, their careers, and their futures to my judgment. I don't take that responsibility lightly. Thompson felt something stir within him that he hadn't experienced in years. Genuine respect for a subordinate's philosophy of command. Throughout his own career, he had focused on efficiency, discipline, and results. The idea of knowing his soldiers as individuals had seemed unnecessary, even counterproductive. But surely personal involvement can cloud military judgment, Thompson said, voicing one of his core beliefs about leadership. How do you make difficult decisions when you're emotionally invested in the outcome? Sarah smiled slightly, the first time Thompson had seen her display anything approaching humor. "With respect, sir, I think you have it backwards. Emotional investment doesn't cloud my judgment, it sharpens it. When you truly understand what you're fighting for, when you know the cost of failure in human terms, you make better decisions, not worse ones." They walked in silence for several minutes while Thompson processed this perspective. His own leadership style had always emphasized distance and objectivity. He had believed that caring too much about individual soldiers would compromise his ability to make the hard choices that command required. "General," Sarah said finally. "May I ask you something?" Thompson nodded, curious about what she might want to know. "When you were a young officer, what drove you to serve? What made you believe the military was the right path for your life?" The question caught Thompson off guard. No one had asked him about his motivations in years, and he found himself struggling to remember the idealistic young lieutenant he had once been. "I believed in duty," he said finally. "Service to country, following orders, maintaining the traditions that made our military strong. I suppose I wanted to be part of something larger than myself. And do you still feel that way?" Thompson considered the question seriously. "I thought I did. But watching your soldiers today, listening to them talk about their experiences under your command, I'm beginning to wonder if I've lost sight of what service really means." They had reached the base chapel, a small building that served soldiers of all faiths. Sarah paused at the entrance, her hand resting on the door handle. "Would you like to see something that might interest you, General?" Thompson nodded and Sarah led him inside. The chapel was simple but peaceful, with rows of wooden pews facing a modest altar. What caught Thompson's attention, however, was a memorial wall covered with photographs and personal items. "This is our unit memorial," Sarah explained softly. "We've lost 11 soldiers over the past 3 years, some to combat, some to accidents, one to suicide. Every person in our unit contributes something to remember them by." Thompson studied the memorial more closely. Among the military photographs and unit patches, he saw personal items that told individual stories. A letter from a soldier's daughter, a baseball signed by a favorite team, a small cross given by a grateful parent. "This is why I stay in field command," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. "These people believed in something worth dying for, and they trusted me to help them serve that belief safely and effectively. I can't honor their sacrifice from behind a desk." Thompson felt a profound shift in his understanding as he looked at the memorial. For 30 years, he had thought of military service in terms of abstract concepts: duty, honor, tradition. But standing in this simple chapel, surrounded by the memories of real people who had paid the ultimate price for their beliefs, he began to see service in more human terms. "Colonel Mitchell," Thompson said slowly, "I owe you an apology." Sarah looked at him with surprise. "Sir? I came here today with preconceived notions about your fitness for command. I was wrong, and I'm sorry for that judgment. General, you don't need to—" "Yes, I do." Thompson turned to face her directly. "I've spent my career believing that good leadership meant maintaining distance, following protocol, and preserving tradition. But you've shown me something different. You've shown me that the best leadership comes from genuine care for the people you're responsible for." Sarah remained quiet, sensing that Thompson had more to say. "I've been so focused on the way things should be done that I forgot why we do them in the first place. Military tradition and discipline aren't ends in themselves. They're tools to help us better serve and protect the people who depend on us." Thompson paused, looking again at the memorial wall. "Your soldiers don't just follow your orders, Colonel. They believe in you, and after today I understand why." The chapel fell silent except for the distant sounds of the base settling down for the evening. Thompson found himself thinking about his own career, wondering how many opportunities he had missed to truly connect with and serve the soldiers under his command. "Sir," Sarah said finally, "may I share something with you that might explain why this matters so much to me?" Thompson nodded, sensing that she was about to reveal something deeply personal. "When I was wounded at FOB Kappa, while I was lying there bleeding and watching my soldiers fight to save each other's lives, I made a promise. I promised that if I survived, I would spend the rest of my career ensuring that no soldier under my command would ever doubt that their life mattered, that their service had meaning, and that someone was fighting for them as hard as they were fighting for their mission." Sarah's voice remained steady, but Thompson could see the emotion in her eyes. "That promise is why I do what I do, sir. It's why I know my soldiers' stories, why I involve myself in their lives, and why I'm willing to put myself at risk to keep them safe. Because they deserve a leader who sees them as more than just tools of war." Thompson felt something fundamental shift inside him as he listened to Mitchell's words. For the first time in years, he remembered why he had chosen military service in the first place. Not for personal glory or career advancement, but because he had wanted to be part of something that mattered, something that protected and served others. The next morning brought an unexpected test that would define everything General Thompson had learned about Colonel Sarah Mitchell and her approach to leadership. At 05:45 hours, an urgent communication arrived from Regional Command. A natural disaster had struck a civilian area 50 miles from the base, and military assistance was needed immediately. Thompson was in the command center when the call came in. A massive landslide had buried part of a small mountain town after 3 days of heavy rain. Local emergency services were overwhelmed, and civilian authorities had requested military support for search and rescue operations. "Colonel Mitchell," the regional commander's voice crackled over the radio, "I need you to deploy immediately with whatever resources you can spare. The situation is critical. We have approximately 200 civilians missing and time is running out." Thompson watched Sarah's reaction carefully. This wasn't a training exercise or a planned operation. This was the kind of emergency that separated competent officers from truly exceptional ones. The decisions made in the next few minutes would affect not only her soldiers' safety, but also the lives of hundreds of innocent civilians. "Understood, sir," Sarah replied without hesitation. "What are our operational parameters?" "You're authorized to deploy up to 200 personnel and whatever equipment you deem necessary. Local authorities will provide coordination with other rescue teams. Your primary mission is search and rescue, but be prepared for medical evacuation and disaster relief as needed," Thompson observed as Mitchell immediately shifted into crisis management mode. Her demeanor became focused and intense, but she remained calm and methodical in her approach to the emergency. "Lieutenant Colonel Harper," Sarah called to her executive officer, "I need Alpha and Bravo companies ready to deploy within 1 hour. Full search and rescue equipment, medical supplies, and engineering tools. Coordinate with the motor pool for transportation." "Yes, ma'am. What about Charlie Company?" "Charlie Company remains here to maintain base security and respond to any additional emergencies. We don't leave our primary responsibilities unguarded, Thompson noted the wisdom in this decision. Many commanders faced with an urgent humanitarian crisis might have deployed all available resources without considering their ongoing obligations. Mitchell was balancing immediate needs with long-term responsibility. "Colonel," Thompson said, approaching her workstation, "I'd like your permission to accompany this mission as an observer." Sarah looked up from the map she was studying. "Sir, this could be dangerous. We don't know what conditions we'll encounter in the disaster zone." "I'm aware of the risks, Colonel. I want to see how your unit performs under real-world pressure." After a moment's hesitation, Sarah nodded. "Of course, sir. But I'll need you to follow safety protocols and stay with the command group. I can't have you getting hurt on my watch." 90 minutes later, a convoy of military vehicles was winding through mountain roads toward the disaster site. Thompson rode in the lead vehicle with Mitchell, observing her continued preparation and coordination. Even during transit, she was constantly communicating with her soldiers, refining plans, and gathering additional intelligence about the situation they would face. The latest reports indicate the landslide covered approximately 12 city blocks, Sarah said, reviewing information on her tablet. Most of the missing people were in residential areas that were buried under 15 to 20 feet of mud and debris. Thompson studied the photographs and satellite imagery that accompanied the reports. The scale of destruction was massive. Entire neighborhoods had simply vanished under tons of earth and rock. Finding survivors would require not just courage but also technical expertise and careful coordination. "What's your plan?" Thompson asked. "We'll establish a command post near the disaster perimeter and coordinate with local authorities to avoid duplicating efforts. Alpha Company will focus on areas where we have the best chance of finding survivors based on building construction and debris patterns. Bravo Company will set up medical treatment and evacuation stations. And if you don't find survivors quickly," Sarah's expression grew somber, "then we shift to recovery operations and do everything we can to help families find closure." When they arrived at the disaster site, Thompson was struck by the overwhelming scope of the destruction. What had once been a thriving residential neighborhood was now an alien landscape of mud, twisted metal, and broken concrete. Emergency vehicles surrounded the area, and Thompson could see dozens of rescue workers already beginning the dangerous work of searching through the debris. Sarah immediately sought out the local incident commander, a fire chief named Williams who looked like he hadn't slept in days. Thompson listened as they coordinated their efforts, impressed by Mitchell's ability to quickly understand the complex logistics of a multi-agency emergency response. "We've got teams working the eastern section, but we haven't been able to penetrate the debris in the western area, where most of the residential structures were located," Chief Williams explained. "We just don't have the heavy equipment needed to move safely through that terrain." "My engineering team can help with that," Sarah replied. "We have equipment specifically designed for moving through unstable debris." "Where do you need us to focus first?" "There's an apartment complex in Grid Square 7 where we're picking up some kind of signals. Could be cell phones or emergency beacons. But the debris is too unstable for manual digging, and we're afraid heavy machinery might cause secondary collapses." Thompson watched as Sarah studied the area in question through binoculars. The collapsed apartment complex was buried under a massive pile of mud and rock that shifted ominously even as they observed it. Attempting rescue operations in such an environment would put her soldiers at significant risk. "I can get people in there," Sarah said finally, "but it's going to be dangerous." "Colonel," Thompson said quietly, "you don't have to take unnecessary risks. No one would fault you for waiting until conditions improve." Sarah turned to look at him, her expression resolute. "General, there are people trapped under that debris. Every hour we wait reduces their chances of survival. If we can save lives, we have an obligation to try." Thompson recognized the same determination he had heard in her voice when she described the FOB Kappa engagement. This wasn't recklessness or a desire for glory. It was a moral commitment to putting others' welfare above her own safety. "What do you need?" Thompson asked, surprising himself with the question. "I need you to trust my judgment and let me do what needs to be done." Over the next several hours, Thompson observed what could only be described as a masterclass in crisis leadership. Sarah deployed her soldiers with surgical precision, using their specialized training and equipment to penetrate areas that had been inaccessible to civilian rescue teams. She personally supervised the most dangerous operations, positioning herself where she could provide direct guidance while sharing the risks with her soldiers. The first breakthrough came when Alpha, company's engineering team, managed to create a stable access tunnel into the buried apartment complex. Thompson watched from the command post as Sarah coordinated the delicate operation of extracting survivors from the unstable structure. "We've got someone alive in apartment 3, came the radio transmission from Sergeant Rodriguez, who was leading the tunnel team. "Adult female, conscious but trapped under debris. We need medical support at the access point." "Medical team is en route," Sarah responded immediately. "Rodriguez, what's your assessment of structural stability?" "It's marginal, ma'am. We can get her out, but we need to move fast. The ceiling is barely holding, and any significant vibration could bring the whole thing down." Thompson felt his heart rate increase as he listened to the exchange. Sarah was facing the same kind of life-or-death decision she had confronted at FOB Kappa. Risk the lives of her soldiers to save someone else, or play it safe and potentially let an innocent person die. "Proceed with the extraction," Sarah ordered. "But I want everyone out at the first sign of structural failure. No heroics." "Roger that, ma'am." Thompson watched the operation unfold through a video feed provided by the rescue team's cameras. The tunnel they had created was barely wide enough for one person, and the debris above them groaned ominously with every movement. It was the kind of situation that required not just technical skill, but also extraordinary courage. 20 minutes later, the civilian was successfully extracted from the building and rushed to a medical treatment station. She was injured but alive, and Thompson could see the profound satisfaction on Sarah's face as the medical team confirmed the woman would survive. "That's one," Sarah said softly, "but the signals suggest there are others." The rescue operation continued throughout the day, with Sarah's soldiers successfully extracting 3 more survivors from the buried apartment complex. Each rescue required the same careful balance of speed and caution, the same willingness to risk everything for the chance to save a life. As evening approached, Thompson found himself watching Sarah coordinate the transition from active rescue to recovery operations. No more living victims had been detected, but families were still hoping to find closure by recovering the bodies of their loved ones. 3 weeks after the rescue operation, General Thompson sat in his office at military headquarters, staring at a personnel evaluation form that would determine Colonel Sarah Mitchell's future career. The events of that day had fundamentally changed his understanding of leadership, courage, and what it meant to serve others. Now he faced a decision that would either advance or potentially end the career of the most remarkable officer he had ever encountered. The official recommendation form asked for a simple assessment: suitable for promotion, suitable for current position, or recommended for reassignment. But Thompson knew that his words would carry weight far beyond these basic categories. A negative evaluation from a general of his stature could effectively end Mitchell's military career, while a strong positive recommendation could put her on the fast track to general officer rank. Thompson thought back to his conversation with his aide, Lieutenant Colonel Reed, earlier that morning. Reed had been surprised by Thompson's obvious change in attitude toward Colonel Mitchell. "Sir, if you don't mind me asking, what changed your mind about Colonel Mitchell?" Reed had inquired. "Your initial assessment was quite different." Thompson had struggled to find words that captured the transformation in his thinking. "Reed, I've spent 30 years believing that good leadership meant following established protocols and maintaining traditional standards. But Mitchell showed me something I hadn't considered, that the highest form of leadership might be knowing when to transcend those limitations in service of something greater." Now, as Thompson prepared to write his evaluation, he reflected on the specific moments that had changed his perspective. The image that kept returning to him was of Sarah Mitchell standing in that unstable tunnel entrance, personally directing the rescue of a trapped civilian while debris shifted dangerously overhead. She hadn't sought glory or recognition. She had simply done what needed to be done to save a life. Thompson began typing his evaluation, choosing each word carefully. Colonel Sarah Mitchell represents the finest qualities of military leadership and embodies the true spirit of service that defines our armed forces. During my inspection of the 47th Infantry Division, Colonel Mitchell demonstrated exceptional competence, innovative thinking, and a level of dedication to her soldiers' welfare that sets a new standard for command excellence. He paused, thinking about how to capture the essence of what made Mitchell special, without sounding overly emotional or unprofessional. Colonel. Mitchell's approach to leadership challenges traditional assumptions while achieving superior results. Her intimate knowledge of her soldiers' capabilities and personal circumstances enables her to deploy human resources with precision and effectiveness that exceeds conventional methods. More importantly, her genuine care for her personnel has created a unit culture that combines high performance with extraordinary morale. Thompson found himself remembering the rescue operation, particularly the moment when Sarah had made the difficult decision to continue searching for survivors, despite the obvious danger to her soldiers. Under crisis conditions, Colonel Mitchell displayed tactical brilliance combined with moral courage that resulted in the successful rescue of 4 civilian lives during a natural disaster emergency. Her willingness to accept calculated risks in service of humanitarian objectives demonstrates the kind of principled leadership our military needs in an increasingly complex world. As he continued writing, Thompson realized he was documenting more than just a professional evaluation. He was recording his own evolution from a traditional military thinker to someone who understood that the best leaders are those who inspire others to transcend their limitations in service of worthy causes. Colonel Mitchell has successfully transformed a standard infantry division into a high-performance unit that excels not only in traditional military operations but also in humanitarian and disaster relief missions. Her soldiers display a level of commitment and competence that reflects exceptional leadership and training. Thompson paused again, thinking about the broader implications of recommending Mitchell for promotion. He knew that some of his colleagues would question his judgment, particularly given his well-known traditional views about women in combat roles. But he also knew that failing to recognize exceptional talent because of outdated prejudices would be a disservice to both Mitchell and the military as a whole. I recommend Colonel Mitchell for immediate promotion to brigadier general and assignment to a position where her unique talents can benefit the broader military community. She possesses the vision, competence, and character required for senior leadership, and our armed forces will be strengthened by her advancement. Thompson completed the formal evaluation and signed it, but he knew that the document alone wouldn't fully capture what he had learned from Sarah Mitchell. He picked up his phone and dialed the number for General Patricia Hayes, the commanding officer responsible for senior personnel assignments. Pat, it's Marcus Thompson. I need to talk to you about a colonel in my inspection rotation who deserves special consideration for promotion. Marcus, you sound different. What's got your attention? Thompson smiled at his colleague's perceptive observation. I've encountered an officer who has forced me to reconsider some fundamental assumptions about leadership and military service. I'd like to discuss Colonel Sarah Mitchell with you. Mitchell, isn't she the one you initially opposed for division command? Yes, she is. And I was wrong about her. Completely wrong. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Marcus, you've been one of our most traditional senior officers for decades. What could possibly have changed your mind so dramatically? Thompson thought about how to explain the transformation he had undergone. Pat, I've always believed that military excellence meant following established procedures and maintaining traditional standards. But Mitchell showed me that true excellence might require the wisdom to know when those traditions serve the mission and when they might limit it. Can you be more specific? She saved 4 civilian lives during a disaster response operation by making decisions that violated conventional risk management protocols. But her violations weren't reckless. They were carefully calculated risks taken by someone who understood that the purpose of military training is to enable service to others. Even when it's dangerous. Thompson paused, gathering his thoughts. More importantly, she's created a unit culture that combines exceptional performance with genuine care for personnel welfare. Her soldiers don't just follow orders, they believe in their mission and trust their leadership completely. And you think she's ready for general officer rank? I think she's exactly the kind of leader our military needs as we face increasingly complex challenges. Traditional military problems require traditional military solutions. But the future is going to demand leaders who can think creatively, adapt quickly, and inspire others to perform beyond normal expectations. Send me your evaluation, Marcus. If it's as strong as you're suggesting, I'll make sure it gets proper consideration. After ending the call, Thompson found himself thinking about the personal impact of his encounter with Sarah Mitchell. For years, he had prided himself on his unwavering adherence to military tradition and his resistance to what he saw as politically motivated changes in military culture. But Mitchell had shown him that clinging to tradition for its own sake could blind him to genuine excellence. A week later, Thompson received notification that Colonel Sarah Mitchell had been selected for promotion to Brigadier General and would be assigned to lead a new joint task force focused on humanitarian operations and disaster relief. The assignment would put her unique talents to their best use while providing her with the platform she needed to influence broader military thinking. Thompson decided to deliver the news personally. He drove back to the 47th Infantry Division base, reflecting on how much his understanding had changed since his first visit there. The same facilities looked different to him now, not because anything physical had changed, but because he now understood what made them special. This was a place where genuine leadership had created a culture of excellence that went beyond mere compliance with regulations. He found Sarah in her office, reviewing training schedules for the coming month. When he knocked on her door, she looked up with the same direct, unafraid gaze that had first impressed him. "General Thompson, this is unexpected. What brings you back?" Thompson entered the office and closed the door behind him. "I have some news that I wanted to deliver personally, General Mitchell." Sarah's eyes widened at the use of her new rank. "Sir? Congratulations, Sarah. You've been selected for promotion to Brigadier General. More importantly, you've been chosen to lead a new task force that will focus on exactly the kind of operations where you excel." For the first time since he had known her, Sarah Mitchell appeared genuinely speechless. She stood slowly as if trying to process the information. "General Thompson, I don't know what to say." "You don't need to say anything. You've earned this through your performance, your character, and your commitment to serving others. The military needs more leaders like you,